Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge, thought-provoking story about one of the biggest flips in fortune in all of human history. A real great reversal between two world-changing civilizations.
To really get what's going on, you have to picture the world in the year 1000. And the source we're looking at paints this incredibly stark picture. On one hand, you've got Baghdad, the shining center of the Islamic world. We're talking a massive city, maybe up to 2 million people, with paved streets, public lighting, over 70 libraries, and hospitals so advanced they were basically running clinical trials. And then you've got Paris, a town of about 25,000 people, muddy unpaved roads, no lights, and medicine that was mostly just folk remedies and superstition. I mean, the difference is just wild, and it's the perfect setup for the mystery we're about to unfold.
You see, Baghdad's greatness was no fluke. It was the absolute height of the Islamic Golden Age, this incredible era of progress. It kicks off in the 8th century with the House of Wisdom, this amazing project to translate literally all of the world's knowledge. A century later, you have al-Khwarizmi laying down the foundations for algebra and algorithms, the stuff our computers run on today. Then in the 10th century, Ibn al-Haytham pioneers the actual scientific method. And by the 11th, a book called The Canon of Medicine by Ibn Sina is the go-to medical textbook for the entire known world. It was an astonishing time.
But fast forward to 1492, the year Columbus sails the ocean blue, and that entire world has been flipped on its head. So this brings us to the core question the source is trying to answer. How on earth did the most advanced civilization on the planet seemingly collapse while a fringe, kind of backwater culture rose up to dominate the globe?
So what happened? You might think, invasion, right? Or maybe a plague, or the economy fell apart. Well, the answer the source gives is way more surprising than that. It argues that this wasn't a case of one civilization being murdered by another. It was something that came from the inside, a choice. To use the source's own powerful words, it was a case of intellectual suicide.
Now, to understand that really bold claim, the source points us to the heroes of its story, the Mutazala. Think of them as a school of Islamic thinkers who were total rationalists. Their core idea was that human reason wasn't in conflict with religious faith. No, they were two sides of the same coin, both leading to truth. And according to the source, this very idea was the engine that powered the whole Golden Age.
But then, a really powerful counter-idea started to grow, known as Asherite Theology. And here's where the story takes a huge turn. The Asherites promoted this radical concept called occasionalism. It says that reason has to take a backseat to revelation. And, get this, there are no such things as natural laws, no cause and effect. Instead, God creates the entire universe from scratch at every single moment. So if you drop a rock, it doesn't fall because of gravity. It falls because God willed it to fall in that instant, and in the next instant, and the next. Just think, how can you possibly do science if there are no laws of nature to discover?
This intellectual counter-revolution was led by some brilliant minds, especially the philosopher al-Ghazali. In his incredibly influential book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, he basically used logic to argue against the reliability of logic itself. I mean, look at this argument from the book cited by our source. Demonstrative proof is impossible. Natural causation is illusory. He's attacking the very foundation of scientific inquiry. The source portrays it as this devastating intellectual strike, coming from right inside the house.
And the effect of this shift in thinking was huge. The source doesn't mince words. It calls it creativity's death sentence. Basically, the top religious thinkers came to a consensus. The gate of ijtihad, which is the right to independent reasoning and fresh interpretation, was now closed. Just imagine that. Imagine being told, that's it, folks. All the important questions have been answered. The time for discovery is over. Now it's time to just preserve and imitate what we already have.
Okay, now let's pivot. Because at the exact same time that this intellectual door was closing in the Islamic world, a new one was creaking open in Europe. A new translation movement got going, but this time the knowledge was flowing in the other direction.
Places like Toledo in Spain, after it was reconquered in 1085, became these massive factories for turning Arabic science and philosophy into Latin. Sicily, the Crusades, they all became these accidental pipelines funneling all of this advanced knowledge into a Europe that was just starting to wake up.
And the sheer amount of knowledge that was transferred, what the source calls an appropriation, is pretty mind-blowing. This table here just gives you a little snapshot. The scientific method? We often credit Roger Bacon in the 13th century, but Ibn al-Haytham was writing about it 300 years earlier. The way blood circulates through our lungs, often attributed to Servetus in the 16th century, but Ibn al-Nafis figured it out back in the 13th. Even algebra, which Fibonacci helped make popular in Europe, came directly from al-Khwarizmi's work 4 centuries before.
So Europe gets its hands on this incredible scientific and technological toolkit. But according to the source, the way this power was used was exceptionally brutal. It points to the colonization of the Americas as the prime example, calling it the barbarian triumph. And the single most powerful statistic it uses is this one: a 90 to 95% demographic collapse of the native peoples of the Americas after European contact. Just let that sink in, a near-total wipeout of entire populations. The source argues this, more than anything, is what cleared the path for Europe's eventual global dominance.
And this new power wasn't just military, it was ruthlessly economic. The source uses the Opium Wars as a case study. The logic, as you can see in this chart, is chillingly simple. Britain had a huge appetite for Chinese tea and silk, but China didn't really want anything from Britain, so British silver was just pouring into China. What was their solution? They started growing massive amounts of opium in British India and then forced it on the Chinese market, getting millions addicted just to reverse that trade deficit. It's a brutal example of the kind of exploitative systems that were built in this era.
Okay, so why does a story from 1,000 years ago still matter? Well, the source argues that this history casts a really long shadow. It sees an ongoing legacy in many parts of the former Islamic Empire today. Things like education systems that sometimes prize memorization over innovation, or economies that are still dependent on just exporting raw materials instead of creating new technologies. And it points to political systems that can stifle the very kind of open debate that made the Golden Age possible in the first place.
But this isn't a story of doom and gloom. The source actually lays out a possible path forward, a kind of roadmap for a modern-day renaissance. It says it has to start with an educational revolution, one that really fosters creativity. That would lead to economic independence, where you're innovating instead of just imitating. And that in turn could spark political renewal and a whole new cultural renaissance, creating authentic, powerful new art and ideas for the whole world.
And so that's where the source leaves us, standing at a historical crossroads that feels eerily similar to the one faced 1,000 years ago. And it ends with this final, really provocative question for all of us to think about. Will the path forward be one of recovery and renewal, or will it be a path of continued decline?